Poor mechanic fixed her car's tracking system. Then found out she was a billionaire looking for him. The rain hadn't started yet, but the sky had that dull steel-gray weight that promised a storm before sunset. Jake Miller wiped his hands on a rag blackened with years of grease and memories. The garage smelled like motor oil, metal shavings, and goodbye. He stood in the center of it all beneath the flickering fluorescent lights surrounded by tool chests, oil drums, and the echo of a life he hadn't expected to end this way. The bank's final notice was duct-taped to the office door. 30 days overdue. The tow trucks would arrive in the morning to take whatever still had value. The rest, scrap and dust. He reached down and picked up a dented socket wrench lying beneath the workbench. His father's initials were still etched on the side, C.M. Carl Miller. Jake's throat tightened. His dad had built this place with his own hands, taught Jake everything he knew about engines and ethics often at the same time. Always fix more than the machine, his father used to say. Fix the doubt in the driver's mind, too. Jake swallowed hard. That voice had been gone for 6 years. Parkinson's had taken his father's strength first, then his speech, then everything else. A crash from outside jolted him back. The metal door rattled. Jake opened it slowly, expecting the wind, or maybe one of the local kids looking to salvage scrap early. But it wasn't that. A sleek silver Tesla Model X rolled quietly into the gravel lot. Strange. No one brought a car like that to his place. The woman who stepped out was equally unexpected, mid-30s raincoat sharp over tailored slacks, dark hair tied back her face unreadable. She didn't look like someone lost. She looked like someone arriving precisely where she meant to be. He stepped forward, wary but polite. "Can I help you?" She held up a small rectangular device, flat black like a custom-built GPS tracker. "This brought me here," she said, her voice calm, precise. "Are you Jake Miller?" Jake hesitated. "Yeah," she nodded, then glanced at the garage eyes scanning every surface like it was a museum she'd only ever seen in dreams. "I think your system's malfunctioning," Jake said, gesturing to the device. "This isn't the kind of place you put in your Tesla's navigation." "It's not a Tesla system," she replied. "It's mine." Before Jake could respond, a gust of wind blew her hair across her cheek. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, held out the device. "I built a tracker," she continued, designed to locate behavioral data patterns rather than fixed addresses. "My software didn't look for where I wanted to go. It looked for who I was looking for." Jake blinked. "Lady, I think you've got the wrong guy." She stared at him, steady and strangely vulnerable. 21 years ago, she said softly, there was a girl. 11 years old. Alone. It was raining. She'd been sleeping behind a gas station for 3 nights straight. You gave her a blanket, a can of soup, and a place to warm her hands. Jake's heart missed a beat. She added, "You also wrote your name and the address of this garage on a paper napkin, with a silver pen." The memory hit him not like a thunderclap, but a fog lifting all at once. A rainy night. A girl too thin for her coat. He'd been 17, working alone after school. She was trembling, hiding behind the dumpster. He hadn't asked questions, just offered soup and a blanket. When she refused a ride to the shelter, he wrote his name down just in case. "You're her," he said, almost in disbelief. She nodded. "My name's Elena Reyes." Jake leaned against the doorframe, stunned. I didn't even think you remembered. I didn't forget." She said, then paused. "I built my entire career on remembering." For a moment, neither of them spoke. A truck rumbled by on the highway in the distance. The sky darkened another shade. Jake cleared his throat. "You should know, this place won't be here tomorrow. I'm closing down. Bank's taking it. I know she said." Jake narrowed his eyes. "How I'm part of the board at Ardent Capital," she said. "The real estate subsidiary handling this acquisition is mine." Silence dropped between them like an anvil. Jake's voice turned hard. "So you're here to apologize?" To make yourself feel better?" "No," Elena said evenly. "I'm here because I just found out what was happening, and I'm here because I have a choice." Jake folded his arms. "What kind of choice to reverse the deal?" she said. "To give this place back to you, or rebuild it with you, or make it something better, something that helps more people like you helped me?" Jake didn't respond. The rain finally began tapping soft against the Tesla, the roof, the old rusted tools inside. He looked at her and didn't see a CEO. He saw the girl from that night, only now she was offering something far greater than a thank you. She was offering redemption. For both of them. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, he turned away. "I have to check on my mom. She's not well." Elena nodded as if she already knew. She held his gaze one last time. "When you're ready," she said, "I'll still be looking." She got back in the Tesla and drove off, her taillights glowing red in the rain. Jake stood there long after she was gone, the storm rolling in behind him. In his hand, he still held the old socket wrench. Only now, it felt like the beginning of something he hadn't dared imagine in years: hope. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm by the time Jake closed up the garage. He locked the side door, pausing to glance once more at the gravel driveway where the Tesla had sat just moments earlier. The puddles shimmered in the muted light from the flickering lamppost overhead. He shook his head as if trying to dislodge a dream that had clung too tightly. Elena Reyes. That name, her face, and that strange device, it all felt unreal. But the memory she'd evoked wasn't. He could see it now, clearer than ever. A shivering girl with tear-streaked cheeks and torn sneakers hiding from the world behind a dumpster. He hadn't thought about her in decades, but now, it all came rushing back. He stepped inside the house behind the garage, just a few modest rooms that still carried his father's scent in the walls. His mother was dozing on the worn recliner in the living room, the TV murmuring softly in the background. Jake moved quietly, kneeling beside her. "Hey, Ma," he whispered, brushing a blanket over her legs. Her eyes fluttered open. "You're still up," she murmured. He smiled. "Yeah. Long day." She blinked at him with that hazy look that sometimes meant she was back in the present, sometimes meant she was somewhere years behind. "Did the girl come by?" Jake froze. "What girl?" he asked gently. His mother's voice was barely more than a whisper. The one with the sad eyes. The one who needed warmth. He stared at her, something fragile unraveling in his chest. She had that look, she continued. "Same one I saw that night. She's older now, but it's her. I remember her eyes." Jake sat back slowly, heart pounding. His mother barely spoke anymore. Most days she couldn't recall what she ate for breakfast. But now she remembered Elena. He rose and made tea, his hands moving through muscle memory. Every motion, boiling water, the clink of the spoon, the scent of chamomile felt both grounding and surreal. He sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Elena had found him. She had built a system to find people who showed kindness and used it to trace one old rusted garage and a boy who'd offered soup and shelter. He didn't know whether to be flattered or afraid. The next morning, Jake found himself unable to stay still. He cleaned the garage, not the perfunctory cleanup he'd done to prepare for the bank, but a real cleaning. He scrubbed tools, wiped shelves, cleared cobwebs. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because someone had seen worth in this place again. By noon, a knock sounded on the metal side door. He opened it, surprised not to see Elena, but an older man in a charcoal gray suit, briefcase in hand, standing under the awning. Rain dotted his shoulders. "Jake Miller," the man asked. Jake nodded. "Mr. Doyle, legal counsel for Ardent Capital." Jake narrowed his eyes. "You people move fast." Mr. Doyle smiled, thinly professional to a fault. "Miss Reyes asked me to deliver some documents personally. She wanted to avoid any formal pressure or legal confusion." Jake took the folder the man extended. Inside was a contract, but not the kind he expected. It wasn't about repossession. It was a release of claim. A full transfer of the property back to Jake Miller at no cost. The garage. The land. No strings. "What is this?" Jake asked, flipping pages in disbelief. "A gift," Mr. Doyle said. "Technically a retroactive correction. Miss Reyes believes this property should never have been included in the acquisition portfolio. She's prepared to return it in full if you consent." Jake stared at the words. Free and clear. No mortgage, no obligation. Why, he asked aloud. "She calls it a matter of principle," Doyle said. "She also requested I tell you, quote, 'This is not a favor. It's the continuation of something that began with a bowl of soup and a place to sit out the storm.'" Jake laughed, incredulous. "She memorized that. She doesn't forget much," Doyle replied. Jake didn't sign the papers. Not yet. That night he sat with the folder in his lap, the rain tapping soft against the tin roof. He thought about every bill he hadn't paid, every job he'd taken for less than he deserved just to stay afloat. He thought about his mother, fading away one quiet day at a time. And he thought about that girl Elena building an empire on a single moment of warmth. He set the papers aside and pulled out a box from the back closet, old mementos, photos, tools from his dad, and at the very bottom, something he hadn't seen in years. A napkin. Creased, stained, but still legible. His teenage handwriting, bold and awkward, Jake Miller, Miller Garage. If you ever need a hand. She had kept her promise. She had come back. And now somehow the past was asking him if he was willing to build a future on that single act of kindness. He looked over at his mother asleep again in her chair. The rain was slowing. For the first time in years, Jake Miller didn't feel like a man watching something end. He felt like someone standing at the beginning of something far bigger than himself. Jake didn't sleep much that night. He lay in bed, eyes open, the folder from Ardent Capital resting on the nightstand like a silent invitation to rewrite his life. The words kept echoing in his mind. This is not a favor. It's the continuation of something that began with a bowl of soup. By morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside looked washed clean, as if it too was trying to reset. Jake rose early and made breakfast for his mother, soft eggs, toast, and tea. She ate slowly, carefully, but today her eyes followed him more than usual. He sat beside her on the couch, the old folder still in his hand. "Ma," he said, "do you remember the girl from that stormy night? The one who wouldn't go to the shelter?" His mother smiled faintly. She was scared, but she looked at you like she wanted to believe in something. Jake exhaled through his nose, more emotion in that breath than in the words he hadn't yet said. "She's back. Her name's Elena. And she's something else now." His mother's hand moved slightly, touching his knee. "So are you." Jake didn't answer. He just covered her hand with his own and stayed like that until her breathing slowed into sleep. Later that morning, he stood outside the garage with the folder still unopened. The early sun glinted off the cracked sign overhead, Miller Garage since 1972. Paint peeling metal, rusted, but something about it looked noble, still standing through it all. The sound of tires crunching gravel caught his attention. He turned to see the Tesla again, silent as a shadow. Elena stepped out dressed simply in jeans and a navy windbreaker this time. Her hair was pulled back into a braid. There was no entourage, no assistant, no press. Just her and that same composed gaze. "You came back," Jake said. "You didn't sign," she replied. Jake held up the folder. "I don't want charity." Elena nodded. "Good, I'm not offering any." They stood in silence a moment, the breeze fluttering the hem of her jacket. Finally, she took a step forward. "I want to show you something," she said. "Do you have time?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Let me grab my keys." They didn't speak much on the drive. Elena didn't try to fill the space with small talk, and Jake appreciated that. They drove 40 minutes out of town past cornfields and highway signs until they reached a low building of brushed steel and glass nestled in a quiet business park. A black sign read, "Ardent Labs, Innovation for Humanity." She led him through security and into a sleek, quiet corridor. People moved through the halls with purpose, nodding politely as they passed. Finally, she stopped in front of a glass door marked simply the kindness file. The room was softly lit, not cold or clinical. Along the walls were large digital displays, maps, live analytics, interface layouts that pulsed with data in motion. In the center of the room stood a single curved console glowing with soft blue light. Jake stepped inside, unsure what to expect. "This," Elena said, stepping beside him, "is the system I built to find you." He looked at the screen as names and icons flickered by, locations, timestamps, behavioral clusters. It wasn't just GPS, it was stories. "I designed it to aggregate minor patterns from crisis reports, charity records, shelter logs, even security camera audio metadata. Things that don't seem connected but form a human fingerprint of kindness over time." Jake stared. "You built an AI to find good people to remember them," she corrected gently. "To make sure kindness doesn't vanish in silence." She tapped a control and a case file appeared. Subject ID, rawest 1, J. Miller, location, Miller Garage, initial event date. October 17th, 2003. Jake's throat tightened. There it was, his story stored in a glowing profile. The girl behind the gas station, the soup, the blanket. A note in silver pen. "You kept that date?" he asked. "I kept everything she said. I started Ardent to solve real-world problems, but this file, this is why I stayed up at night. I didn't want to forget what it felt like to be helped by someone who didn't ask why." He looked at her, then really looked, and what he saw wasn't the billionaire or the engineer. It was the same girl from that night, only now she carried power, clarity, and the fire of someone who had turned pain into purpose. "Why show me this?" Jake asked. "Why now?" Elena folded her hands in front of her, choosing her words with care. "Because people like you build the world quietly, and then lose it just as quietly. I wanted you to know you mattered, even when you forgot, and maybe now you can matter again." Jake felt something inside shift, subtle but irreversible. Not pride, not ego, but possibility. "Why me?" he asked softly. "Because kindness isn't random," she said. "It's rare, but not lost, and it shouldn't disappear when the money runs out." Silence settled between them, warm and heavy. Jake turned back to the screen. His name pulsed there, steady alive in digital memory. "What do you plan to do with this file?" he asked. Elena's eyes glistened not with tears but conviction. "Grow it. We're launching a public-facing version. People can submit stories, search for the helpers they never thanked. We'll use it to build scholarships, grants, local support systems. Real impact. But I want you to be part of it." Jake blinked. "Me?" She smiled. "The first name in the file. The man who made me believe people still cared." Jake stepped back from the console, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, he wasn't just someone trying to survive. He was someone who had mattered, and someone who could again. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's talk." And with those two words, the future opened like a door, long rusted shut, finally swinging wide into light. Jake didn't speak during the ride back to town. He sat in the passenger seat of Elena's Tesla, staring straight ahead, arms folded, wrestling with a mix of disbelief, gratitude, and unease. The visit to Ardent Labs had cracked something open in him, a door he wasn't sure he wanted open at all. And behind it was the same question that had haunted him since Elena reappeared. Why him? The sun had already dipped low by the time they turned onto the familiar gravel drive that led to his garage. Dust kicked up in soft spirals behind them. Elena parked the car and turned off the engine. Silence filled the cabin. Jake finally spoke. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were that first day?" Elena looked at him. "Because I wanted to see if the man I remembered still lived here." He raised an eyebrow. "And I think he does," she said. "But I also think he's hiding behind something." Jake laughed under his breath. "You think I'm hiding, lady? I've got bank notices taped to my wall and a mother who barely knows what day it is. What exactly do you think I'm hiding behind?" She didn't flinch. Resentment, pride, maybe fear. Jake opened the door and stepped out. "Thanks for the ride." He heard her door open and close behind him as he walked toward the garage. Her voice followed him, calm but firm. "You didn't even ask about the property transfer, Jake." "Why not?" He stopped back still to her. "Because I don't want it if it's some kind of compensation." "It's not." He turned around slowly. Then, "What is it, Charity?" "No," she said. "It's a reset. A way to honor what this place stood for." Jake shook his head. "What it stood for doesn't pay taxes, doesn't keep the roof from leaking, doesn't keep the lights on. I could help you with that." He took a step toward her. "And then, would I become the mascot for your AI program, the face of your press release about kindness? No thanks. I'm not a project." Elena's jaw tightened, and for a moment the polished CEO cracked. "You think this is about publicity?" "I don't know what it's about anymore," Jake said, quieter now. "But you dropped a miracle into my lap, and I don't trust things that drop from the sky." "I didn't drop a miracle," she said. "I traced one. 21 years ago, you gave something that changed a life. I'm just giving the world back to the man who showed me it was worth living in." Jake looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes didn't waver. She meant it. All of it. And somehow that made him even more uncomfortable. "I've spent years keeping this place alive with duct tape and coffee fumes," he muttered. "Now someone shows up with answers I didn't ask for." "Maybe it's time to stop surviving and start living," she replied. The words hit harder than he expected. He looked away, unsure whether it was anger or shame tightening his chest. At that moment, the screen door to the house creaked open. His mother stepped out, leaning against the frame, a robe wrapped around her frail shoulders. "Jake," she called, her voice faint but clear. "You out there?" He turned. "Yeah, Ma, I'm right here." Elena followed his gaze. Her expression softened. "Is it all right if I say hello?" Jake hesitated, then nodded once. Elena approached with careful steps, her voice gentle. "Hello, ma'am. I'm Elena. I was here a few nights ago." Jake's mother squinted eyes, adjusting. "I remember your voice," she whispered. Elena's eyes glistened. "You remembered me, even when I didn't introduce myself. You were cold and small," his mother said. "That night, you cried in your sleep. Jake gave you his last can of soup." Jake turned away, emotion rising too fast. Elena knelt in front of the woman who had once wrapped her in a blanket that smelled like motor oil and lavender. "I never forgot," she whispered. "Not him. Not you." Jake's mother smiled. "You came back." Elena nodded. "I did." A long silence followed. Not awkward, reverent. Later, after helping his mother back inside, Jake returned to find Elena standing at the edge of the garage looking at the faded mural painted along the back wall. It had been his father's idea years ago, a pair of hands cupped around a tiny engine with the words, "Fix what matters." "I always liked that," she said quietly. "Fix what matters." Jake joined her. "My dad believed every broken thing deserved a second chance. Even people." She looked at him. "So, why not give yourself one?" He sighed. "Because I don't know what that looks like anymore." Elena turned to face him fully. "Let me show you. Let's not make this a handout. Let's make it a partnership. I want to rebuild this garage not into a shrine to the past, but a future. A community space. A training ground. A story that keeps growing." Jake met her eyes. There it was again, that fierce calm in her gaze. Not pity, not obligation. Vision. "I don't have the energy," he said. "You do," she replied. "You've just spent it surviving." He didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Let's fix what matters, Jake. Together." He stared at her. A lifetime of disappointment, pride, and loneliness had built a fortress inside him, but in that moment he felt the first brick loosen. "I'll think about it," he said quietly. She smiled. "That's all I ask." She turned and walked toward her car, but not before pausing at the door. "And Jake." He looked up. "I'm not here to take anything away from you. I'm here because you gave me something no one else ever did, hope. Let me give some of it back." Then she left, her taillights disappearing into the quiet dusk. Jake stood alone in the fading light, surrounded by tools, rust, and the slow tremor of a life-shifting course. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the last man standing. He felt like someone who might still have something left to build. Jake had always believed in fixing things with his hands. Engines, carburetors, busted brake lines, those made sense. They came with parts and diagrams, a clear order of operations. But what Elena had offered, that was something else entirely. It didn't come with a manual. It came with hope, and Jake didn't know where to put something that abstract. The next morning, the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Jake poured a mug and stepped onto the porch, his boots creaking against the old planks. His mother was already up, sitting in her chair blanket over her legs, staring out into the morning light. "She came back," she said softly, not looking at him. Jake nodded. "She did." And he exhaled. "She wants to help rebuild the garage. Turn it into something more." His mother's eyes stayed on the horizon. "And what do you want?" That was the question, wasn't it? For so long he hadn't allowed himself to want anything beyond keeping the lights on and his mother cared for. But what if there was more? Before he could answer, a small voice called from across the yard. "Mr. Miller." Jake turned to see Liam, the kid from 2 trailers down, sprinting toward him with a crooked grin and a backpack almost as big as he was. Jake stepped down to meet him. "Hey, buddy." "What's up?" Liam held out a piece of paper, a rough drawing of a robot holding a wrench. "I drew this in school. It's our garage robot. He fixes cars and makes grilled cheese." Jake chuckled, heart softening. "You think we could build something like that?" Liam grinned. "If anyone can, it's you." Jake watched him run back down the gravel path. The boy's laughter echoed like a memory of something long buried, joy, potential purpose. That same afternoon, Elena returned. No Tesla this time. She walked up the path on foot, carrying a thin portfolio and a coffee for each of them. Jake met her, halfway took the cup and offered a cautious smile. "Bribery with caffeine. Bold move. I learned from the best," she said. "You bribed me with soup. Remember?" They sat on overturned crates under the garage awning, the smell of gasoline and sawdust mixing with the afternoon air. Elena opened the folder and laid out a set of renderings. Jake blinked. "You already designed something." "Nothing's final," she said. "Just ideas. A co-op workspace. Auto training programs for local teens. A tech station in the back for diagnostics, maybe even EV retrofitting classes. We'd keep the spirit of the place, your dad's tools, your name, but make it sustainable." Jake traced one of the drawings with his finger. "You think people around here would go for this?" "I do," Elena said. "People want to learn. They want to work with their hands. But no one's giving them the chance." He nodded slowly. It was ambitious. Big, but not impossible. "There's one catch," she added. "Of course," Jake said, sitting back. "Always a catch." She met his eyes. "I want you to run it." Jake blinked. "What I can fund it. Help with the structure, the permits, the tech. But this isn't my story. It's yours. If this place is going to mean something to the people here, it has to be led by someone they trust. Someone who knows this town, knows its heart." He looked down at his hands, still rough and stained from years of labor. "I'm a mechanic, Elena. I fix stuff. I don't run youth programs." "You fix people too," she said quietly. "You did it for me. You still do it for the kids around here. They look up to you, Jake, whether you realize it or not." He laughed dryly. "I don't even know where to start." "That's okay," she said. "Start where you always have, with what's broken." Jake's throat tightened. He thought about the high school dropout rate in town, the shuttered shops, the kids like Liam who had nowhere to go after school but broken sidewalks and screen time. He thought about the kids his dad used to mentor, letting them sweep the garage floor and hold flashlights under the hood just to give them a place to belong. And then he thought about that one night 21 years ago when a frightened girl with rain in her hair and shadows in her eyes had stepped into the warmth of a small, messy garage and found something that changed everything. He stood. Elena watched him, searching his face. "I'll do it," he said. A slow smile spread across her lips. "Yeah, but not as a favor," he added, "not as a figurehead. If we're going to do this, it has to be real. For the community, for the kids, for everyone who ever thought they weren't worth rebuilding." Elena nodded. "Then let's get to work." They shook hands, firm, honest, equal. Just as they turned to head inside, a soft crash sounded behind them. Liam had tripped over a pile of bolts sprawling onto the pavement. Jake rushed over, helped him up, checked for scrapes. Nothing serious. "You okay, champ?" Liam nodded sheepishly. "I was going to ask if I could help with the robot today." Jake ruffled his hair. "You just became our first intern." Liam beamed. As Jake led the boy inside, Elena lingered for a moment, her eyes drifting to the sign above the garage. Miller Garage. Since 1972, she whispered to herself, still fixing what matters. And for the first time in years, Jake felt not like a man who had lost everything, but like someone who had found what he didn't even know he'd been missing. A reason to build again. A reason to stay. And this time, he wouldn't do it alone. The next few days moved with an energy Jake hadn't felt in years. Word had spread fast. A billionaire backing the old Miller Garage people in town whispered, guessed, speculated. Some thought it was a buyout. Others thought Jake had struck gold. But most simply hoped it was true that someone was finally investing in this place again, not just with money, but with belief. Jake tried to ignore the chatter. He focused on clearing the inside of the garage, sorting through rusted parts, salvaging what could still be used. Elena visited daily, bringing coffee and blueprints, discussing zoning with the city meeting, quietly with contractors and community leaders. But she never pushed Jake. She just showed up, constant, steady patient. On a quiet Thursday morning, as sunlight filtered through the high windows of the garage, Jake pulled down an old storage box from the loft above the back office. He hadn't looked in it since his father passed. It was dusty, heavy, marked in black ink C. Miller, Archive. Inside were Polaroids from decades ago, pictures of his father standing beside beat-up Buicks and Chevys, grinning with grease on his hands, faded receipts, notes from customers thanking him for honest work. And near the bottom, wrapped in a brittle manila envelope, Jake found something he didn't expect. A silver pen. The same one he used that night. The one he'd given Elena with the napkin. Jake froze. He sat down on the bench, the pen cradled in his palm, and everything rushed back in full color. The storm. The way she'd flinched when he stepped outside. The torn sleeves of her hoodie. The trembling hands when he handed her the soup. How she hadn't cried until he gave her the blanket. He remembered how she refused to go to the shelter but clung to the little metal stool near the heater like it was the last safe place in the world. He remembered the moment he wrote his name and address and gave her the pen. Just in case you want to find your way back. He had no idea back then how much that moment would mean. To her. Or to him. Jake stood, hand tightening around the pen. He knew what he had to do. That afternoon, he asked Elena to meet him not at the garage but at the diner on Main Street, the one that served real cherry pie and hadn't changed its wallpaper since 1986. She arrived wearing jeans and a light jacket, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. No driver, no fanfare. They sat in the back booth. Jake ordered coffee for both. For a long moment, neither spoke. He slid the silver pen across the table. Elena looked down, and when she picked it up, her fingers trembled ever so slightly. "I found it this morning," Jake said. "In my dad's things. I forgot how much that night mattered. Not just to you, to me." She traced the pen's barrel with her thumb. "It was the first thing I ever owned that felt like a promise." Jake swallowed hard. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just a kid trying to help. But you did help, she said softly. And not just that night. Jake leaned forward, elbows on the table. Tell me the rest, Elena. I want to hear it from you. Everything that happened after. She nodded. After I left your garage, I walked for hours. I remember the cold and the dark, but I also remember the way your blanket smelled motor oil and lavender. It was the first time I felt safe in months. Jake smiled, blinking fast. I ended up near the old Lutheran church on 9th, she continued. They had a food pantry. A volunteer there called a foster coordinator. I was placed with a family in Denver. It wasn't perfect, but they cared. You stayed in touch with them for a while, but I outgrew the system fast, got a scholarship, worked 2 jobs through MIT, started Ardent at 24. Jake shook his head, slowly awed. And you never forgot that night. No, she said, meeting his eyes, because it reminded me that the world wasn't all broken, that one small, unrequested kindness could rewrite someone's story. They were quiet again. Then Jake asked the question he hadn't dared before. Why did you really come back? She didn't hesitate. Because no one ever came back for me, she said. Not until you. You didn't even know me, and you gave me warmth and dignity. I wanted to prove that not only does that kind of kindness matter, it multiplies. Jake looked at her, and for the first time the weight he'd been carrying for years, disappointment, regret, quiet sorrow, felt just a little lighter. I think my dad would have liked you, he said. I think he already does, she replied, smiling. Later that night, back at the garage, Jake pulled out a ladder and climbed to the sign above the office door. The old wooden board that read Miller Garage had begun to crack. With a marker and a steady hand, he added 3 small words beneath it. Fix what matters. And as he climbed down, Elena stood watching from the driveway, hands in her pockets, eyes bright. You remember now? She asked. Jake nodded. Everything. And the wind that moved through the rafters wasn't just a breeze, it was a memory returning home. By Saturday morning, the old Miller garage looked more alive than it had in years. Sunlight streamed through freshly cleaned windows, the scent of dust and oil replaced by lemon cleaner and fresh paint. The old rust-colored tool cabinet gleamed with polish, and Elena had installed a whiteboard in the back room to begin mapping out the future layout learning stations, a small classroom space, a workshop for teens. Everything was in motion. Jake felt like a man standing in 2 worlds. One foot still anchored in the life he knew tools grease solitude. The other edging into something much bigger, something hopeful. He'd spent so long fixing machines he'd forgotten what it felt like to rebuild meaning. That morning, Elena arrived early, carrying a cardboard tray with 2 coffees and a bag of fresh bagels from the bakery downtown. She greeted Jake with a soft smile. I figured the founder deserves breakfast, she said. Jake gave a small laugh and took the cup. I'm still not used to being called that. Well, better get used to it. Tomorrow we meet with the city board about zoning. Monday the contractors start, and I talked to the high school principal. She's excited about launching the after-school apprenticeship program. Jake whistled low. You don't waste time. I learned not to, Elena said. Time doesn't wait. Neither should we. They sipped coffee side by side on the loading dock in easy silence. That's when they heard the commotion. A shout, then a crash. Jake was up in seconds, bolting toward the front of the garage where he'd left the bay door partially open for ventilation. Outside in the alleyway, Liam was on the ground. Jake's heart stopped. The boy was pale, one arm twisted beneath him, his bike lying several feet away. A small puddle of blood darkened the gravel where his knee had torn open. Jake dropped to his knees beside the boy. Liam whimpered, trying not to cry. I was going to show you the new drawing. I took a shortcut. Jake examined him carefully. His knee was bleeding badly and his elbow was scraped deep. More worrying, the boy was shaking borderline in shock. His breathing was rapid. It's okay, Jake said softly. I've got you. Elena knelt beside them without hesitation, pulling out her phone to call emergency services. Jake didn't wait. Years of muscle memory kicked in. He grabbed the first aid kit from the wall, cut away the pant leg with a pocket knife, and applied pressure with gauze while murmuring calming words. His hands were steady voice sure even as his pulse pounded. The siren was distant but growing. Elena stood back watching him, not just the way he worked, but the why. The look in Jake's eyes wasn't panic. It was fierce, focused care. The same look he'd had the night he gave her soup and a blanket. A fire truck pulled into the alley, paramedics rushing forward. Jake stepped back only when the professionals arrived, letting them take over. He stayed nearby as they checked Liam's vitals and loaded him into the ambulance. Before they closed the doors, Liam looked up at Jake. "Am I still your intern?" the boy whispered. Jake smiled, eyes glassy. "You just got promoted to assistant foreman." The doors shut. The ambulance pulled away. Jake turned to Elena. His hands were still stained with blood, his knees dusty from the gravel. He looked shaken, but also steady. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just hate seeing kids get hurt." She looked at him, her voice soft. "You saved him, Jake. If you hadn't been here." Jake rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling hard. He shouldn't have had to go through that. "This alley's not safe. That shortcut. It's the only way some of these kids get here after school." Elena's gaze sharpened. "Then let's make it safe. We'll petition the city for better lighting. Maybe pave the walk." Jake looked at her. "You're serious? I'm always serious about protecting the people who show up," she said. He watched her for a moment. The way her eyes shone not with fear, but with fire. Not with charity, but with conviction. Then Jake spoke quietly but clearly. "I want to expand the program." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Already, I want more kids," he said. "More than just a workshop. A mentorship pipeline. Auto mechanics, electronics, trade skills. Things that give them a path like this garage gave me one. Like it gave you." Elena's face softened. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Jake turned, looking at the old garage now alive with the scent of paint and dreams. "No," he said. "But I'm sure it's worth it." That evening, Jake stopped by the hospital to check on Liam. The boy was doing well, some stitches, a brace, nothing broken. His mother, tearful but grateful, hugged Jake tightly. "You were there when it counted," she said. Jake nodded, heart full. "He's got a good future. Let's make sure he gets there." On his way out, Jake walked through the quiet hospital corridor past rooms filled with patients, nurses, lives in flux, and for the first time in years, he felt part of something larger than himself. Not a man watching the world go by, but a man building something in it. When he stepped outside, Elena was waiting beside her car. Jake smiled at her through the soft glow of the parking lot lights. "We're not just fixing engines anymore," he said. "No," she replied. "We're fixing futures." And in that moment, the past wasn't something to mourn. It was something to build on, together. Sunday morning arrived quietly. The sky was pale and gentle, the kind of soft blue that only appeared after a long rain and a long silence. Jake stood alone inside the garage, sunlight catching on the tools he had hung meticulously along the pegboard. The floor had been swept twice. Everything was clean ready. He was restless. Elena hadn't come by that morning for the first time in nearly a week. Jake wouldn't admit it out loud, but he missed her presence, the way she moved through the garage like she belonged, the way she always saw 10 steps ahead without missing what was right in front of her. She wasn't just rebuilding his garage, she was rebuilding him. He was pouring another cup of coffee when the knock came. Not Elena this time. It was Mr. Doyle, the attorney, who had first brought the deed transfer, holding a simple envelope in his hand and wearing that same perfectly pressed suit. Jake, the man, greeted him. "She asked me to give this to you personally. Said it wasn't something she wanted to send by email." Jake accepted the envelope, confused. It wasn't sealed, just folded with his name written in long, elegant cursive. Inside was a letter. The ink was blue, slightly faded, as if it had been written years ago. It had. Jake, if you're reading this, it means I finally found you. Or rather, it means I finally let you see how long I've been trying to. I wrote this letter 10 years ago when I got my first real office. It was small, barely bigger than the back room of your garage. I was 23, broke and terrified. But I had this memory that kept me going, a boy with grease on his hands and more kindness in his heart than anyone else I'd ever met. I thought about sending this to you then. I even looked up Miller Garage on Google Maps, but the place didn't come up. I worried maybe it had closed. Maybe you'd moved on. Maybe I'd imagined you all along. But I never stopped remembering that night. I never stopped trying to build something worthy of the kindness you gave so freely. And if you're holding this now, it means I finally got to give something back. Thank you for being my reason, for being my reminder that love can come in the form of soup and silence, that protection can come from strangers, that family isn't always blood. It's sometimes a boy who writes his name on a napkin because he doesn't know how else to offer hope. You mattered, Jake, more than you'll ever know. Elena Jake read the letter twice, then a third time, and when he was done, he sat in the office chair his father once used, holding the pages like they were something sacred. No one had ever written to him like that. No one had ever told him he mattered like that. He hadn't even known he needed to hear it until the ache in his chest proved otherwise. That afternoon, the town felt different. Maybe it was the breeze or the sunlight, or the way Jake walked through it with the quiet awareness that something inside him had shifted. He made his way to the small community park behind the elementary school, the place where Elena was scheduled to meet with the city outreach director about youth programming. When he arrived, she was already there. Not in a blazer or heels this time, but in sneakers and a gray hoodie hair and a braid clipboard in one hand and a dog-eared copy of Start With Why in the other. She looked up as he approached. "Hey." Jake said nothing at first, just handed her the letter. She recognized it instantly. "You read it," she said. He nodded. "It's the most honest thing anyone's ever given me." She hesitated. "I meant to send it a long time ago. I just didn't know if it would be too much." Jake chuckled softly. It wasn't too much. It was just enough. Elena's expression softened. "I meant every word." Jake looked at her, and this time he didn't look away. "I know you did," he said, "and I think I needed to read it more than I realized. Not just because of what you said, but because it reminded me that who I used to be. He's still in here, somewhere." "You never stopped being him," she said gently. They sat down on a nearby bench beneath a large oak tree, a late summer breeze rustling the leaves above them. Elena broke the quiet. "I think part of me came back here because I wasn't just looking for you. I was looking for home." Jake nodded slowly. "Funny. I've been living in one place so long I didn't realize how far I'd drifted. From what he took a deep breath. From myself. From hope. From believing that something good could still come out of this old life." Elena looked out toward the horizon. "I think kindness has a way of circling back. Not always fast, not always loud, but it finds you when you're ready for it." Jake turned to her. "You came all the way back for a boy with nothing but a blanket and a can of soup." She met his gaze, and found a man who still gives more than he realizes. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was deep, sacred. After a while, Elena stood. "I should get back. I promised the principal I'd email the proposal tonight." Jake rose too. "You're not staying long this trip, are you?" She hesitated. "I fly back Tuesday. Board meetings." He nodded. "Of course." She studied him. "But I'll be back. I've got a garage to help rebuild." "Remember," Jake smiled. "I'll hold you to that." As she turned to go, Jake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. It was the napkin. The very same one he'd written his name on 21 years ago. A little yellowed, a little fragile, but still intact. "I found this too," he said. Elena froze. Her eyes filled as she took it, holding it like a piece of her own childhood had returned. "You kept it," she whispered. "I guess some promises stick better than we think." She pressed the napkin to her chest for a long second before slipping it into her bag. Then she looked up at him. "I'll see you soon, Jake." And with that she walked away, the setting sun catching her silhouette like a scene from a memory that would never fade. Jake stood there long after she was gone, heartful hands empty but somehow feeling more whole than he had in decades. Some letters don't need to be mailed. Some are meant to arrive exactly when the soul is ready to receive them. Jake stood before a room full of people in pressed shirts and clipboards. It was Monday morning, and he was at City Hall, something he hadn't done since renewing his mechanic's license 5 years ago. He felt out of place. Hands, rough boots, dusty as flannel shirt creased at the collar. But beside him stood Elena, composed, confident, and unmistakably prepared. She'd emailed him the proposal 2 nights earlier. He had expected a short outline. Instead, it was a 30-page vision document, architectural renderings, phased timelines, grant eligibility projections, and even a tentative partnership plan with the local high school. At the center of it all was one core value printed in bold on page 1: fix what matters. Jake had underlined it 3 times with a ballpoint pen before putting the pages down. Now he was staring at a long wooden table with 6 city officials seated in a line. Some looked skeptical, others intrigued. One man in the back, Mr. Garrison, the zoning coordinator, watched him like a hawk. His expression said, "Convince me." Jake cleared his throat. "I'm not a speaker. I'm not polished. But I've lived here all my life. This garage, it's not just where I work. It's where I learned to become someone people could count on, where I learned to fix more than broken engines. I want to give that same chance to the kids in this town." He hesitated, his palms damp. "Not all of them will go to college. Some won't even finish high school unless they find a reason to stay connected. I want this garage to be that reason, a place where they learn how to rebuild something with their own hands and believe they can rebuild their lives too." He stepped back. The room was silent. Elena picked up where he left off, her voice clear and steady. She detailed the educational partnership, the mentorship rotations, the community engagement strategy. She had answers for every concern: insurance, permits, ADA compliance. But she didn't speak over anyone. She spoke with purpose and clarity. When they finished, there was a pause. Then Mr. Garrison leaned forward. "This is an ambitious plan, Mr. Miller, especially for someone with no background in education or nonprofit management." Jake nodded. "You're right. I've never run a program like this. But I've taught a dozen kids how to change brake pads, rebuild carburetors, wire electrical systems. I've kept this business running with duct tape and borrowed time, and I've been the kid who thought no one would ever come back for him." He glanced at Elena. "I got lucky once," he said. "Someone did come back. Now I want to be that someone for somebody else." Garrison looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. A woman beside him smiled. "Let's vote." By that evening, approval had been granted, a 6-month provisional program pending results and review. Jake held the letter in his hands like it was something sacred. Elena was waiting for him outside, leaning against her car, arms folded and grin wide. "Guess you're officially a program director," she teased. Jake shook his head. "If I'd known it took this much paperwork, I would have stuck to lug nuts and timing belts." She laughed. "You'll learn." There was a pause. Then Jake said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me say no." Her eyes softened. "You didn't say no. You just forgot how to say yes." They stood there in the twilight, neither speaking. But something had changed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. The next day, Elena drove Jake to Ardent Labs. "This isn't just a tour," she told him as they pulled through the gated entrance. "I want you to see what the kindness file is becoming." Inside, the building pulsed with quiet energy designers, engineers, social workers, all working in tandem. Elena led him to a conference room filled with screens, maps, and data visuals. One of the interns brought up a new case file. A teenage girl, homeless after aging out of the foster system. But based on her last known location patterns, the Kindness File AI had predicted a high probability she'd visit a specific train station in Tulsa where a former volunteer had once offered food and blankets. "We intercepted the pattern last week," Elena explained. "Sent a social worker to meet her at the station. She's now in transitional housing, enrolled in a GED program." Jake stared at the screen. Because of a memory, Elena nodded. Because someone was kind once and our system learned how to follow the echo. He stood quietly absorbing it all. A system built on compassion. A machine learning to trace goodness. He looked at Elena. "You built something that remembers what people forget. I built something because you reminded me not to forget." He exhaled slowly. "And now you want this file to go public." She nodded. "Soon. We're almost ready. People will be able to submit their own kindness stories. Track people they never thanked. Build community logs of silent heroes." Jake swallowed. "And you want me to be a part of it?" "I don't want," she said. "I need." He didn't answer immediately, but something in his chest stirred. For so long he'd been trying to keep his world from collapsing. Now he saw what it looked like to help rebuild a larger one. "I'm in," he said quietly. "For the garage, for the kids, and for this." Her smile said everything she didn't. That night, Jake returned to his house and found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, a soft light falling across her folded hands. She looked up at him with the clarity she only had on her best days. "You look lighter," she said. "I think I am," Jake replied, setting his keys down. She gestured to the napkin on the table, the one Elena had left for him years ago now, neatly pressed between two panes of glass framed. "Still, fixing what matters?" she asked with a small smile. Jake bent down, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "Starting to." And for the first time in a long, long time he felt like the man his father had raised him to be. Not just a mechanic, but a builder of better days. The hum of progress now echoed through Miller Garage. The peeling paint had been replaced by a fresh coat of soft blue-gray. The cracked windows were now clean panes with the words, "Miller Garage, fix what matters," hand-painted in gold leaf by a local artist. Every corner of the building bore signs of renewal. New light fixtures, reinforced walls, and a small reception desk made of reclaimed wood. But it wasn't the new materials that made the space feel alive again. It was the people. High schoolers came in after class, some timid, others full of too much energy but nowhere to put it. Jake greeted each one by name. They weren't students. He refused that word. They were apprentices, and they were his responsibility. Each teen had their own workbench now. Liam, in a knee brace but more energetic than ever, wore a custom lanyard that read, "Assistant Foreman." He took his duties seriously, handing out tools, double-checking torque specs, and correcting anyone who left grease on the handles. Elena dropped by regularly but never hovered. She knew this wasn't her stage. She simply stood in the wings watching the sparks fly, literal and metaphorical, as the teens sanded metal, rewired headlights, and slowly learned how to build more than engines. One Friday afternoon, as the kids packed up their projects and headed out, Jake caught Liam lingering by the front bay door. "You all right, kid?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. Liam hesitated. "Can I ask you something kinda big?" Jake nodded. "Shoot, if I keep coming here, and I keep learning, does that mean I won't end up like my dad?" Jake froze for a moment, towel crumpled in his hand. He'd met Liam's father once, a man who had stumbled into the garage asking for a tire patch and left with an angry outburst when Jake gently turned him away for being too drunk to drive. Jake knelt so he was eye level with the boy. "Listen," he said softly. "Where you come from. It's a part of your story, but it's not the whole book. What you do now, that's how you write your own pages. And from where I'm standing, you're already doing that." Liam's face brightened a flicker of something Jake recognized belief. "Okay," the boy said quietly before trotting off to join his waiting mom outside. Jake stood there a while longer, the moment sinking deep. That night, Elena invited Jake to a small gathering, just a few close staff from Ardent Labs, some city partners, and a couple of local nonprofit leaders. Nothing flashy, just a quiet evening under string lights in the backyard of her rented cottage at the edge of town. He hesitated at first, but she'd looked at him that afternoon with her signature steady gaze and said, "You've earned your place at the table. Stop acting like you're waiting for an invitation to your own story." So he went. The garden glowed with warm lantern light. People mingled, sipping tea or wine, laughing softly. Elena moved through them, effortlessly offering introductions and warm smiles. Jake stood near the fence nursing a soda when a woman from the school board approached him. "You're Jake Miller, right?" He nodded. "My nephew's one of your apprentices. He talks about the garage like it's Hogwarts." She chuckled. Jake grinned. "Well, I can't promise magic, but we do weld a mean bumper." She touched his arm. "You're doing something special. Don't let anyone downplay that." Later, as the evening wound down, Elena found him seated on the back steps watching the stars emerge. She sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. "I saw you talking to Miss Holland," she said. "She said, I run a magic school." Elena laughed, soft and warm. "Well, you do teach people how to transform." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that felt comfortable earned. Then Elena spoke again, voice low. "I'm not staying in Silicon Valley much longer." Jake turned to her surprised. "I've already handed over most of the operations. The Kindness File team can run independently now. I've built what I needed to build there." Jake frowned. "Where does that leave you?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "Wherever I can keep building things that matter." A pause. "I want to be here more," she said. "Not just to visit, to stay, to help grow the garage, and whatever else might grow." Jake's heart caught in his chest. For years he'd shut doors before they even opened. But now one stood wide before him and all he had to do was step through. "I'd like that," he said, voice rough. "More than you probably know." She smiled. "I think I do." The following week, Jake was up early. The garage was quiet, the sun just rising. He made coffee, then walked to the wall behind his father's old workbench. There he hung a new frame. Inside was a photo Elena Liam and 3 apprentices standing proudly around a half-finished engine block, hands smudged with grease grins wide. Below it a brass plaque read, "Because kindness deserves to be remembered." Jake stood back, hands on his hips. The garage wasn't just alive again. It had a future. And for the first time, so did he. The first snow of the season fell softly, like forgiveness. It blanketed the streets in a hush, covering the town in quiet grace. Jake stood just outside Miller Garage, the cold air reddening his cheeks, his breath visible in short puffs. The sign above the door gleamed against the gray sky, Miller Garage. Fix what matters. Below it, a string of lights glowed warm against the cold. Inside, the sound of laughter and tools echoed like music. It was the grand opening of the new Miller Community Auto Workshop, a dream months in the making. The garage had been transformed into a space that honored its roots but pointed toward the future. One bay still bore the familiar smell of oil and rubber, but others now held workbenches built for small hands, shelves of protective goggles, and a whiteboard outlining the week's schedule of lessons. Jake moved through the crowd, shaking hands with old neighbors, nodding to city officials, and catching smiles from parents whose children now called this place their second home. Liam stood beside a rebuilt electric scooter, proudly explaining the circuitry to a wide-eyed reporter. The boy's brace was gone now, but he still walked with a slight lean, a reminder of where he'd started and how far he'd come. Jake's mother had been brought in by wheelchair earlier that morning. She sat near the heater in the corner, wrapped in the same quilt Jake had grown up with. Her eyes followed him wherever he went, filled with a quiet pride that needed no words. And then there was Elena. She stood near the garage's central column speaking with a small group of community leaders. She wore a simple winter coat and a wool scarf, but she radiated the kind of presence that turned heads without trying. When her eyes found Jake across the room, her smile widened. Slow, real meant only for him. She walked over as if she'd always belonged there. "This turned out better than I imagined," she said, voice soft beneath the chatter around them. Jake chuckled. "That's because I let you handle the budget." She nudged him with her elbow. "You handled the heart." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the apprentices demonstrate how to safely jack a car frame and reattach a bumper. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "I just didn't want the place to die." "You didn't just keep it alive," she said. "You gave it a soul again." He looked down humbled, then said, "I think I finally understand what my dad meant all those years, about fixing more than machines." Elena tilted her head. "What do you think he meant?" Jake turned his gaze, sweeping the room, the kids learning, the parents hopeful, the team of volunteers pouring coffee and handing out toolkits. "I think he meant that when you fix something broken, you help someone believe they're worth fixing too." Elena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small and familiar, a folded napkin, now preserved in a clear plastic sleeve. "I wanted to give this back to you," she said. Jake blinked. "You kept it. I never stopped," she said. "That night it was all I had. And when everything felt like it might fall apart again, I'd take it out and remember that there was someone once who didn't walk away." Jake looked at the napkin, his name, his handwriting, his address, and felt tears prick the backs of his eyes. Not from sadness. From a deep, overwhelming gratitude that someone had carried his kindness like a compass through a storm. He took her hand in both of his, gently closing her fingers around the napkin. "No," he said. "You keep it. Not because you still need it, but because it's part of how this all began." She looked at him, quiet emotion rippling behind her eyes. Jake took a breath. "You came back for me, Elena. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was waiting for you too." The moment stretched between them, not dramatic, not flashy, just right. The kind of moment that doesn't need fanfare because it is earned. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. Their kiss wasn't the start of something, it was the affirmation of what had already grown steady and true. It was warmth, meeting warmth, finally. When they pulled apart, a cheer rose from the crowd behind them, not for the kiss, but for the ribbon-cutting ceremony beginning at the far end of the room. Jake grinned. Time to make it official. They walked to the makeshift stage where the city mayor held a pair of comically large scissors. Jake was handed a mic he never asked for, but didn't resist. He looked out at the crowd. People of every age. People who remembered what the garage once was. People who could now dream of what it would become. He cleared his throat, his voice a little rough but certain. 21 years ago, I gave someone a place to stay warm for a night. I thought it was small. I thought it would be forgotten. But kindness, he said. Pausing to look at Elena has a funny way of finding its way back. He glanced toward the apprentices gathered near the tool racks. This place is proof that even small acts matter, that we're all fixable, that what's broken isn't the end, it's just the beginning of something stronger. The room erupted in applause. Jake raised the scissors, sliced through the ribbon, and with that, Miller Garage was officially reborn. That evening, when the last guest had left and the lights dimmed, Jake and Elena stood at the threshold watching snow fall gently against the parking lot. Inside, the space was quiet again, but no longer empty. Elena turned to him. "What's next?" Jake took her hand. "We keep fixing what matters." And under that old wooden sign, beneath a sky full of stars and a town full of new hope, Jake Miller finally understood. He hadn't saved a girl in the rain all those years ago. She'd saved him, too. And together they'd saved something bigger than either of them had dared to imagine. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far kindness can travel. Single dad was fixing lobby lights at 2 a.m. Then a woman in a robe whispered, "You're so handsome." The lobby lights had been flickering for 3 days straight, and it was finally driving Gabe Carter crazy. He stood alone on the creaky stepladder, squinting at the old fixture while the storm outside howled like a living thing. Snow lashed against the wide lobby windows of the Pine Haven Mountain Resort, a luxury retreat nestled in the Colorado Highlands. Most guests were asleep by now, at least the ones who could sleep. Gabe tightened a bolt with his gloved fingers and sighed. He'd just finished a 10-hour shift clearing snow and salting walkways. But the lights were out again, and when you were the only maintenance man on duty at 2 a.m., there was no passing the buck. His back ached, his boots were still damp, and he hadn't had more than 5 hours of sleep in 2 days. But Gabe wasn't one to complain. He had bigger things on his mind, like whether Eli's new medication would hold through the next cold snap, or if he could stretch the week's grocery budget another day. He reached into his toolbox, grabbed a fresh fuse, and muttered, "Let's try this again." Just then, he heard it soft footsteps against marble. He paused. No one should have been up. Housekeeping ended their shift at midnight. Reception was unmanned at this hour, and security had checked in 15 minutes ago. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate. Then stopped. Gabe slowly turned his head toward the hallway. And there she was. A woman stood near the base of the grand staircase, framed by the soft glow of a wall sconce. Her robe was silk ivory and fell just past her knees. Barefoot, her long, dark hair was pulled back loosely like she'd stepped out of sleep or a dream. Her eyes locked on his, unreadable at first. Then something flickered in them. Recognition. Desperation. "You're really handsome," she said. Gabe blinked, nearly dropping the fuse. The silence after her words was thick enough to choke on. He stepped off the ladder, carefully placing both feet on the ground before answering. "Ma'am, I think you might be—" "I'm not drunk," she said quickly, her voice calm but tense, like someone trying very hard not to break. "I know what time it is, and I know what I'm doing." He set his tools down, slowly, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. Years of being a single father had taught him how to read situations fast, especially when someone was on the verge of unraveling. "All right," he said gently. "Then maybe you'd like to sit down. The fire's still warm." She looked at the stone hearth across the room but didn't move. "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. "Yes." "One." She nodded to herself as if that confirmed something. "Then maybe you'll understand why I'm about to do something insane." Gabe gave her a careful, patient look. "Try me." She stepped closer, just enough for him to see the faint shimmer of tears in her eyes. "I need you to pretend to be my fiancé." Gabe stared at her, waiting for a punchline. It didn't come. "Look," she said, folding her arms tightly across her chest as if to hold herself together. "You probably think I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But I'm supposed to fly to New York in the morning and announce my engagement to a man I don't love in front of my entire family and every shareholder in our company. I don't want to marry him. I never did." Gabe didn't move. He studied her. Not just her appearance, but her tone, her posture. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dare. It was a last-ditch act of defiance one whispered in the middle of the night to a stranger in work boots. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Because you look like someone who won't lie just to impress me. And because you were the only man working in this entire resort at 2 a.m. fixing a broken light without asking for thanks. That says something. That I need the paycheck. That you have pride in what you do. And maybe you know what it's like to feel trapped." He didn't answer. She stepped even closer now, her voice lower. "I'll pay you. Generously. Just pretend to be my fiancé for a few days. Enough to convince my father and the board that I've made my own choice. Then you can go back to your life. Clean break." Gabe looked down, processing. He wasn't some wandering grifter looking to play games. He had responsibilities. Eli. His job. His quiet, hidden life. But the desperation in her voice wasn't fake, and neither was the fear behind her eyes. He exhaled slowly. "You don't even know my name." She straightened her posture, extending a hand with crisp boardroom poise. "Clarice Monroe, acting CEO of Monroe Holdings." "And you are Gabe," raised an eyebrow, shaking her hand with a firm grip. "Gabe Carter, maintenance guy, snow shoveler, and apparently fiancé for hire." A half smile broke across her lips, almost surprised she could still manage one. "Then I guess this is where our engagement begins." Somewhere down the hall a clock chimed softly. It was 2:11 a.m., and everything had just changed. Clarice sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the resort's reading lounge, her robe now covered by a borrowed gray cardigan Gabe had handed her without a word. The fire behind her crackled quietly, the flames softening the edges of her tension. She clutched a porcelain mug of peppermint tea, though she hadn't taken a single sip. Gabe leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, his blue maintenance jacket still zipped to the collar. His toolbox sat beside the hearth, forgotten for now. He had questions too many, but none he could ask without breaking whatever fragile state held her together. "This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go," Clarice said, her voice thinner than before. "I was going to take a walk, clear my head. I didn't expect to find you." Gabe arched an eyebrow. "You sound disappointed." "No," she said quickly, almost defensively. "Not disappointed, just surprised. You didn't ask questions." "Most people do." He shrugged. "You didn't look like someone who wanted to be interrogated." That drew the smallest smile from her. "You're right. I didn't." Gabe took a slow breath, then stepped closer. "Look, Clarice Miss Monroe, whatever this is, I'm not the guy for it. I'm just trying to keep my son healthy and a roof over our heads." Her eyes met his sharply at the mention of his son. "You said his name was Eli, right?" He nodded. "Yeah, 10 years old. Asthma. Smart enough to know when I'm lying and kind enough to pretend he believes me anyway." Something in Clarice's face cracked. Her gaze dropped to her lap. "That's the thing about kids, isn't it? They see straight through us." Gabe softened. "What happened, Clarice? What brought you out here in the middle of a storm, hiding from a life most people would trade everything for?" She looked up. "Control. That's what it's all about. My father's empire runs on it. Controlled assets, controlled narratives, controlled people, including me." She stood and walked slowly toward the window, her figure silhouetted against the falling snow. "I was a straight-A student. Got my MBA by 23. Took over regional strategy by 25. I've never missed a quarterly goal. But none of that matters to my father unless I also marry Henry Fields, the son of his oldest investor." Gabe stayed quiet. There was no judgment in his expression, just calm listening. Clarice continued. "They planned the whole thing, even the proposal. I was just a guest at my own life." A long silence followed. "And now you want me to be your ticket out?" Gabe asked quietly. Clarice turned. "Not out. Just a detour. Long enough for me to make my own decisions, not ones inherited from boardroom deals." He studied her for a long moment. "You're asking a stranger to stand beside you in front of people who can smell weakness from across a conference table." She straightened, her jaw tightening. "I don't think you're weak. That's not the point." She stepped closer. "I saw the way you spoke to me. The way you didn't rush, didn't posture. That's rare where I come from." Gabe hesitated. "This isn't just about me. If I go with you, I'll be gone for days. I'd have to leave Eli with my neighbor Annie. She's reliable, but he's had 2 attacks this month already." Clarice didn't hesitate. "I'll pay for his medication. For private care while you're gone. I'll make sure he's safe. You have my word." He let out a slow breath. Her offer was tempting, too tempting. And dangerous. His gut twisted with the weight of it. But then he remembered Eli's last ER visit, the fear in his son's eyes as the oxygen mask came down, the rising cost of prescriptions. the maintenance bills he hadn't opened yet. "You'd do that?" he asked. "Even if I say no later?" "Yes." That was the moment he knew she wasn't bluffing. There was no agenda in her voice, just exhaustion and a kind of battered honesty he respected. "I have conditions," he said. She blinked. "Name them." "1, no lying to Eli. If he asks, I tell him the truth. 2, you don't make me wear a tux unless it's absolutely necessary." Clarice smiled, a real one this time. "Deal. And 3." He paused, staring at her intently. "If this gets messy, and it will, you don't let me become your shield. I won't be someone you use to hurt your father." She met his gaze evenly. "I don't want to hurt him. I just want him to see me." Something about the way she said it settled the decision in his gut. Gabe exhaled through his nose. "All right then, Miss Monroe. Let's ruin a few expectations together." Clarice extended her hand again, this time firmer, more certain. "Let's." They shook. From the hallway, a digital clock blinked 3:01 a.m. in red. Outside, the storm began to ease, and inside, two strangers sealed a pact that would upend both their lives, one born not of ambition or romance, but of something rarer, mutual recognition in a world that rarely noticed people like them. The first thing Gabe noticed when they landed in New York wasn't the icy wind slicing between the glass towers, it was the way Clarice Monroe walked. She moved like a woman carrying a sword no one else could see. Every step down the jetway, every nod to passing assistants, every flick of her gaze was purposeful, controlled, regal, and completely unlike the woman who had whispered desperation through chattering teeth just 48 hours earlier. Gabe kept close his boots still dusted with the Colorado snow he hadn't quite brushed off. He'd worn his best clothes jeans without holes and a gray blazer Clarice had bought him for optics, but he still felt like someone walking into the wrong room at the wrong time. Their black town car glided through midtown traffic, cutting past honking cabs and LED billboards flashing with stock tickers and perfume ads. Gabe sat stiffly beside her, watching her eyes scan through documents on a sleek tablet. "Where are we going now?" he asked, trying not to sound like a hostage. Clarice didn't look up. "First, the penthouse. You'll meet Rosalind, my executive assistant. She'll brief you on the cover story. Then we'll change and go to the gallery opening. My father will be there. Henry, too." Gabe frowned. "We're doing all that today." She finally turned toward him. "The faster we go public, the harder it is for them to unravel." There was a pause. "And you'll need to act like you're used to this." This, Gabe said, glancing around the car's interior, feels a bit like pretending to breathe on Mars. Clarice smirked. "Then, hold your breath. You'll be fine." The penthouse was everything Gabe expected and nothing he'd ever imagined, living in polished floors, glass walls, art so abstract he wasn't sure which way was up. Eli would have called it a spaceship full of really nervous furniture. Rosalind, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, approached Gabe with a nod of acknowledgement, then handed him a sleek folder. "Your bio," she said curtly. "You've been in Clarissa's life for 6 months. You met in a charity function in Aspen. You share values, not status. You're private, steady protective. She finds your authenticity refreshing. You adore her. You want to marry her." Gabe raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's a lot of feeling for 6 months." Rosalind didn't blink. "That's Manhattan." Clarice disappeared into another room to change, leaving Gabe with a suit bag, a tie he didn't know how to tie, and 23 minutes to become the man she needed. By the time they stepped out of the car at the gallery, Gabe was transformed, or at least camouflaged. The space was flooded with people in tailored suits and glittering dresses, each holding champagne flutes and expressions of curated boredom. A modern jazz quartet hummed quietly in the corner. Spotlights reflected off glass and brushed metal casting soft glows on the guests' faces. Clarice slid her arm through his, pulling him close. Her perfume was subtle lavender and something woodsy. "You ready?" she murmured. "No," Gabe said honestly. She smiled. "Good. That means you won't overplay it." They moved through the crowd like a current. People turned curious. Whispers followed. Then came the flash. And another. A journalist called her name. "Clarice, over here, is that your fiancé?" She turned without missing a beat, pressing Gabe's hand against her waist like they'd done it 1,000 times. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and clear. "This is Gabe Carter. We're engaged." The room rippled. Some smiles turned tight. Others raised glasses in polite confusion. Then a voice cut through like a knife. "Well, isn't this unexpected?" Clarice tensed. Gabe turned. Henry Fields. Slick, tall, and dressed in navy wool. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I thought you were still considering our father's merger," Henry said. "Now you're announcing engagements." Clarice didn't flinch. Some deals fall through. Others turn out to be better investments. Henry glanced at Gabe. "And this is the upgrade." Gabe smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes either. "I'm just the man who answers when she stops pretending." Clarice blinked just once, but it was enough. The heat in her cheeks wasn't embarrassment. It was something else, something she hadn't expected from a stranger in work boots. Henry studied Gabe a moment longer, then leaned in toward Clarice. "This won't last," he whispered. "Your father will never allow it." Clarice answered in a whisper of her own. "Then he's about to find out how much I've grown." Henry walked off. The crowd slowly returned to its usual buzz. Clarice and Gabe stood together under the lights, their connection half imagined, but now dangerously close to real. Gabe leaned close. "You all right?" She took a slow breath, eyes still on Henry's back. "I wasn't until you said that." He tilted his head. "Which part?" "The part about me not pretending. I haven't heard anyone talk to me like that in years. Not like I'm some asset to manage." Her eyes met his vulnerable again. "Thanks, Gabe, for showing up tonight." He gave a quiet nod. "Just promise me you'll tell me when it stops being pretend." Her smile was faint. "I think I'll know when it does." The cameras kept flashing. The city kept spinning. But something had shifted between them, something subtle and fragile and real beneath all the practiced smiles and polished lies. And for the first time in a very long time, Clarice Monroe didn't feel like she was acting. Clarice woke the next morning in her penthouse bedroom with the strange sense that her world had shifted, and not in the way she expected. Outside the enormous windows, the city pulsed to life beneath a slate-gray sky horns echoing like a hymn to motion. But inside, it was oddly quiet. She sat up, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. Gabe had slept in the guest room, he'd insisted, and though it was all for show, a part of her had felt something tighten when she watched him walk away down the hallway last night. Not attraction. Not yet. Just a recognition of something. Grounded. Authenticity. She wasn't used to it. Certainly not for men in her world. In the kitchen, she found him already dressed jeans, a clean Henley sleeves, pushed up barefoot, flipping pancakes like it was second nature. Eli would have adored him. "Morning," Gabe said casually, not looking up from the skillet. She blinked. "You cook," he shrugged. "I parent. Cooking comes with the job." She walked to the counter, watching him pour a fresh cup of coffee and slide it across to her without asking. It was exactly how she took it. No sugar splash of oat milk. "How'd you know?" she asked, surprised. Gabe smirked. "I have eyes. You used that milk 3 times yesterday and never touched the sugar jar." She smiled into her cup. Observant. Occupational hazard. Fixing things means you have to notice what's broken first. Clara studied him for a moment. There was something in his tone, not pride, but presence. Gabe had the kind of stillness that made other people settle without realizing it. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. He glanced over. "Miss what?" "The boardrooms. The strategy. Your old life." He paused before answering, then set the pan aside. "Not really. I miss being good at something that mattered, but not the world I had to live in to be there." Clarice tilted her head. "You were good." Gabe met her eyes. "I was very good." She let that settle for a beat. "So why walk away?" His jaw tightened slightly, because my wife got sick. And I realized no one in that world knew how to hold space for grief. They saw weakness as a liability. I didn't want to be part of a place where you have to hide your humanity to survive. Clarice felt something lurch in her chest. She lowered her cup. I'm sorry. Gabe gave a half smile. You don't have to be. I got Eli out of it. And a quieter life, it's enough. But the way he said enough told her it wasn't. Not really. Later that afternoon, Clarice and Gabe entered the conference wing of Monroe Holdings. The building rose 50 stories above Fifth Avenue, a glass and steel tribute to power. Gabe didn't speak as they rode the elevator, but she saw him watching everything: entry badges, exit paths, digital security panels. He was scanning, calculating. Clarice leaned closer. You're analyzing this like a battlefield. He gave her a wry glance. In corporate strategy, it usually is. The elevator doors opened, revealing the executive floor. Waiting for them was her father, Douglas Monroe. Douglas had the air of a lion gone silver. Trim suit, polished shoes, eyes like granite. He was flanked by Henry Fields and 3 senior board members. Clarice, he said evenly, I didn't expect you back so soon. I wanted to introduce someone, she said calmly. This is Gabe Carter. Gabe extended a hand. Pleasure, Mr. Monroe. Douglas looked him up and down with the precision of a man appraising market risk. Your background, Gabe, didn't flinch. Small business consultant, former partner at Crane Bennett Strategy Group. I left 5 years ago. Currently working independently, mostly by choice. Henry laughed under his breath. That's one way to say unemployed. Gabe turned to him. Unemployed implies no work. I raise a 10-year-old, manage full maintenance operations at Pine Haven Resort, and apparently now serve as an emotional decoy for a corporate princess. I'd say that's 3 jobs in one. Silence fell. Clarice's breath hitched. Then, surprisingly, Douglas chuckled. Just once, but it echoed. I like him, Douglas said. He's got bite. Clarice blinked. Henry's face darkened but said nothing. After the meeting, as they waited for the elevator, Clarice turned to Gabe. You didn't have to push back that hard. Yes, I did, he replied simply. She hesitated. Why? Because this world eats people alive? You need someone next to you who won't be devoured. I can't be your shield if I fold at the first sign of condescension. Clarice swallowed hard. You're not just playing anymore, are you? Gabe's expression softened. I never was. Not completely. That evening, back at the penthouse, Clarice poured herself a glass of wine and stared out over the city lights. For the first time in years, she wasn't dreading the next morning. Wasn't plotting the next move like a chess game she was destined to lose. She was thinking of pancakes, of 10-year-old boys and quiet bravery, of a man who fixed things not just with tools, but with words. And she wondered what it meant when the lines between pretend and real began to blur, and why the idea didn't scare her as much as it should have. The next few days unfolded like a beautifully rehearsed play. Clarice and Gabe moved through meetings, dinners, and curated appearances with synchronized precision. The press was enchanted. The grounded self-made fiancé was a narrative the tabloids couldn't resist, and Clarice's image surged in public favor. But behind closed doors, the performance grew increasingly complicated. Gabe wasn't supposed to fit into her world so seamlessly. He wasn't supposed to remember everyone's names in the boardroom, or quietly hand her a pen during a negotiation when she was fumbling with nerves. He wasn't supposed to speak up once, and then sit back and listen like he was studying her not to gain leverage but to understand her. He wasn't supposed to make her feel seen. And worst of all, he wasn't supposed to make her feel safe. One night after a charity event hosted at the Met, Clarice and Gabe returned to the penthouse later than usual. The car ride had been quiet, but not in a tense way. More like 2 people who had grown used to silence not being awkward. She changed into a soft gray sweater and poured herself a cup of tea, while Gabe disappeared into the guest room. But when she walked past Eli's room, the one Gabe had temporarily set up with pictures and books she'd never noticed before, she paused. The lights were off, but the door was cracked. Inside, Gabe was sitting on the edge of the bed, softly reading a story out loud. Clarice leaned against the doorframe, her heart catching in her throat. And the little engine said, "I think I can. I think I can." And he pulled the others up the hill. Gabe read his voice calm and warm. Then he looked up, catching her watching. "Sorry," he said with a quiet smile. "I know he's not here, but it helps me feel close to him." Clarice walked in and sat on the floor beside the bed. "You do that every night?" Gabe nodded. "I used to read to him from the hospital when I was out of town. Now I just do it from wherever I am, even if he's not listening. It keeps me grounded." Clarice looked at the small collection of worn children's books on the nightstand. "Your son's lucky. I'm the lucky one." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said softly. Gabe nodded. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're okay?" He exhaled slowly. "All the time. But I made peace with the idea that I'm allowed to carry pain and still keep going. They're not mutually exclusive." Clarice swallowed. "I've never known how to do that. You've been taught to compartmentalize. Most people in your position have. But that kind of life, it costs you." She looked at him. "What did it cost you?" He hesitated. "My marriage. Not because I didn't love her, but because I was too busy trying to fix everything that was breaking around her. I stopped just being there." Clarice's throat tightened. "And now I try to show up for real. Even when it's hard. Even when I'm scared." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That sounds exhausting." Gabe smiled gently. "It is. But it's also the only thing that ever made me feel human again." Clarice looked away, blinking quickly. Something sharp and unspoken was shifting inside her chest. A kind of ache that had nothing to do with longing and everything to do with finally understanding what she'd been missing all these years. Connection. Not the performative kind. Not the kind bound by status or mutual benefit. But the raw, unpolished, deeply present kind. She stood brushing invisible dust from her jeans. "Gabe." He looked up. "When this is over, when the performance ends, I don't know if I'll be ready to let you go." The words hung in the air, terrifying in their honesty. Gabe stood slowly. There was a gentleness in his expression, but no pretense. "Clarice, we're walking a very thin line here. I know, this started out as a lie, but it's not all a lie anymore, is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said very quietly, "I don't know what it is. I just know it's real." And then, just as naturally as a breath, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips lingered, not to seduce, but to stay to say, "I see you, even when you're not trying to be seen." Clarice's eyes closed for half a second, the warmth of the moment washing over her like sunlight breaking through clouded glass. But before she could speak again, a sharp chime cut through the room. Her phone. She walked over and picked it up, heart-pounding. The screen read, "Father, 3, missed calls." She swallowed and answered. Dad, Douglas Monroe's voice came through cold and sharp. "You need to turn on the news." Clarice turned toward the TV and grabbed the remote. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. A photo of Gabe shirtless working on a broken pipe outside the resort in Colorado. The headline beneath it screamed Clarice Monroe's Fiancé Fraud, or Fortune Hunter. Her breath caught. Gabe walked over slowly, watching the same screen. She turned to him, dread coiling in her stomach. "They found you." He nodded once. "And they're just getting started." The warmth of the moment shattered like glass beneath a high heel. And just like that, the beautiful lie they'd been living began to teeter on the edge of something dangerously real and publicly unraveling. The headlines didn't stop. By noon, every media outlet from Wall Street Journal to gossip blogs had picked up the story, Clarice Monroe's mystery fiancé, a single dad with a secret past. Photos of Gabe fixing pipes, shoveling snow, and even walking with a paper bag of groceries circulated with brutal speed. They framed him as a fraud, an opportunist. Some painted him as romanticized working-class charm. Others whispered gold digger. But the truth was far more complicated and far more human. Clarice stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, staring at the skyline as her phone buzzed relentlessly on her desk behind her. She hadn't spoken to Gabe all morning. He'd left early to clear his head, said he needed air. But she could still feel the ghost of his presence, the way his quiet steadiness had become part of the air she breathed. Douglas Monroe's voice echoed from her last conversation with him. "You've jeopardized your entire position for a man you barely know." But she did know Gabe. She knew how he brewed coffee exactly 7 minutes after waking up, how he checked the air filters in her penthouse without asking, how he spoke to her like she was a person, not an asset. That kind of knowing didn't need years, it needed honesty. And Gabe had given her nothing but that. The door burst open without a knock. Rosalind entered, tablet in hand, lips pursed. "I've contained the damage as best I can. PR is working on a statement. Your father wants you in the boardroom in 30. Clarice turned. What kind of statement? That this was all a misunderstanding. That you and Mr. Carter had a brief romance, but you've ended the engagement. Gracefully. Clarice's pulse throbbed in her neck. That's not true. Rosalind's expression didn't change. Truth stopped mattering the minute his photo hit the tabloids. Clarice crossed her arms. I won't lie, not for the board, not for my father. Then, you're going to lose your seat. The words landed like a slap. Not because they were unexpected, but because they no longer terrified her the way they once did. I appreciate your loyalty, Rosalind, she said, voice steady. But I didn't fight this hard to finally have a voice, only to use it repeating someone else's script. Rosalind looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a rare show of softness, she said, Be careful. The board isn't kind to women who bleed publicly. Clarice gave a half smile. Then maybe it's time they see what bleeding with dignity looks like. Meanwhile, Gabe was across the city walking the quiet pathways of Central Park. The snow had started to melt, leaving patches of wet earth and gravel exposed. He'd turned off his phone hours ago. Not because he was hiding, because he was trying to remember who he was before all this began. Before tuxedos and flashing cameras, before fake bios and corporate posturing, before he'd let himself believe even for a moment that he could belong in a world built on power games and polished masks. He sat on a bench near the frozen edge of a pond, rubbing his palms together. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. He wasn't ashamed of where he came from, but he hated how easily people dismissed him because of it. A voice startled him. You're not hard to find. He looked up. Clarice stood before him, wrapped in a long wool coat, her eyes soft but sharp. I figured you'd be somewhere real, she said. Somewhere quiet. Gabe exhaled, his voice low. They tore into everything, didn't they? Yes, she said. And I didn't stop them. Not fast enough. He shook his head. This isn't on you. I disagree. She sat beside him, close enough for their arms to nearly touch. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clarice turned to him. They want me to renounce you in front of the board, to say you were a mistake, a moment of weakness. Gabe didn't flinch. And are you going to? She paused. I don't know what this is between us yet, but I know it isn't a mistake, and I'm done pretending it is. He looked at her. Really looked. You'd give up everything for that. She smiled, small but fierce. I think I'm starting to understand what everything actually means. Gabe stared out over the pond, heart pounding. I can't promise I'll fit into your world, Clarice, he said. But I can promise I'll never let you become someone you're not just to survive it. She reached for his hand, then firmly, not delicately, like a decision. I don't need you to fit in, I just need you to stand with me. 30 minutes later, they entered the Monroe Holdings boardroom together. It was a room built to intimidate long mahogany table panoramic view of the skyline, 20 men and women in tailored suits, cold eyes. Douglas sat at the head, flanked by Henry Fields. Clarice stood at the opposite end, Gabe beside her. Her voice rang out clear, "You all asked for an explanation. Here it is. I chose Gabe Carter. I chose honesty. I chose a life where I don't have to check my integrity at the door." The room shifted uncomfortably. Douglas narrowed his eyes. "So you're willing to risk this company for what sentiment?" Clarice lifted her chin. "I'm not risking it. I'm reshaping it. If that means stepping down, so be it. But I won't lead with fear. Not anymore." She reached for Gabe's hand, and to her surprise he took it without hesitation. The silence that followed wasn't applause, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something rarer. Respect, even if it came reluctantly. Clarice hadn't known silence could be this loud. The elevator descended from the Monroe Holdings boardroom, its walls of polished brass reflecting the expression on her face, calm, composed, until you looked into her eyes. She stood with her back straight, her fingers still wrapped around Gabe's, though his grip had softened, unsure. The confrontation had gone better than expected. No dramatic firing, no instant scandal, but the fallout would come. Clarice knew how these people operated. Their retaliation never screamed. It whispered behind closed doors and withheld funding, stalled projects, and carefully worded memos. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Gabe pulled his hand away gently. She looked at him, startled. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer immediately. They walked out through the marble lobby side by side, his pace slower than usual. "Gabe," she asked again. Outside, a cold wind cut between the buildings. Gabe finally stopped beside a planter box dusted with snow. "I need to go back to Colorado." Clarice blinked. "What?" "Just for a few days," he said. "I talked to Annie this morning. Eli's been having a rough week. 2 coughing fits, 1 hospital visit." Her chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to fix it. He's my son." "Clarice." She nodded slowly. "I understand." "Of course. But this feels like more than just a check-in." He looked at her. "Really?" Looked. "It is." She felt it then, like something slipping between her fingers, unspoken and irreversible. "This world," he said, motioning to the skyscrapers around them, "was never meant for me. I can borrow the suit, learn the lingo, shake the hands, but it's not who I am. And I can't afford to lose myself trying to keep up." "But you didn't lose yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "You grounded me. You walked into my chaos and didn't run. You're the most real thing that's happened to me in years." He reached for her hand again, not with passion, but with the weight of someone making peace. "That's why I need to step away," he said, "because I don't want what we have to get poisoned by the pressure around it. Not now, not when it's just starting to be something true." Clarice swallowed. "So that's it. You're leaving. I'm choosing to show up for my son. And maybe to figure out what it means to show up for you, but in a way that doesn't make either of us smaller." She closed her eyes briefly, battling tears. "I wish you didn't have to go." He smiled faintly. "So do I." That night, Clarice wandered her penthouse alone. No Gabe making tea in the kitchen. No quiet humming while he folded towels or adjusted the thermostat. The silence was unfamiliar and unbearable. She sat on the couch and opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The front page of nearly every business site featured her name. Some articles praised her bold stand for independence, while others questioned her emotional judgment and speculated about her future as CEO. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the hollow in her chest where Gabe's steadiness had been. She clicked open a browser and typed, "Flights to Colorado." Then she stopped. Not because she doubted her decision, but because this wasn't about chasing him. It was about becoming someone who wouldn't lose herself again just because someone else walked away. That was the real cost of love, not in losing control, but in choosing who you are when no one else is there to catch you. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, Gabe returned to a snow-covered world that felt both familiar and strange. Eli ran into his arms at the airport, clinging tightly. "Dad," the boy whispered, "I missed you every second." Gabe kissed his son's hair heart, swelling with something deeper than words. "Me too, bud. More than you know." Later, as they sat in their modest living room fireplace, crackling cartoons playing quietly in the background, Gabe realized how different everything looked now. The peeling wallpaper, the squeaky heater, the thrift store couch. None of it had changed. But he had. He was still a single dad, still juggling bills, still watching over a boy with lungs too fragile for winter. But he wasn't alone anymore, not in the way that mattered. Clarice's voice lived in his head like a melody he hadn't known he missed until it was gone. He thought about texting her. Then he didn't. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at his door. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note in Clarice's elegant script. "You once told me pain and motion aren't mutually exclusive. I'm learning that too. I've kept your mug in the cupboard, just in case you find your way back to it." Clarice taped to the bottom was a child's drawing, Eli's unmistakably with stick figures, Gabe Clarice, and a crooked heart between them. Gabe stared at it for a long time. He knew then that distance didn't diminish real things. It clarified them. On the 7th night, Gabe tucked Eli in, read him 2 chapters, and lingered at the bedroom door. Then he walked to the living room, picked up his phone, and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said softly. Gabe's voice broke through. "I want to come back. But not just for you." Clarice was silent for a beat. "Then why for us?" he said. "For what we are when we're not pretending." She exhaled a shaky breath. "Then, come home." And for the first time, Gabe realized she didn't mean New York. She meant wherever he stood with her beside him. The day Gabe returned to New York, the city was wrapped in one of those soft, unexpected March thaws where the air hinted at spring, but the sidewalks still clung to the last bite of winter. He stepped off the train with nothing but a small overnight bag and a folded drawing from Eli tucked into the front pocket of his coat. Clarice was waiting for him on the edge of the platform, not in her usual heels and coat of armor, but in a simple navy sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, no makeup. There was no press, no performance. Just her. He smiled before he could stop himself. She walked toward him and stopped a few steps away. "Hey, hey," he said, voice low and a little breathless. "Did you come to save me?" she asked, half playful, half vulnerable. He shook his head. "No. I came to walk beside you. That's all I ever really wanted." Her eyes filled, and before she could say anything, he reached out and gently took her hand. They didn't need to fill the silence. They were the silence. And the peace inside it. That evening, they sat together in the penthouse, no scripts between them. Gabe stood at the kitchen counter, stirring soup sleeves, rolled up a towel tossed over his shoulder. Clarice leaned against the doorframe, watching him like someone witnessing something sacred. "I missed this," she said quietly. He glanced up. "You missed my soup?" "No," she said, smiling. "I missed you. You're being here. Like this." He set the spoon down and walked toward her. "You know, you could have had any man in this city. Any man in this country, really. And you chose a guy who can fix your sink but struggles to fit in at a cocktail party." Clarice took his hand and placed it over her heart. "I didn't need someone who fit in. I needed someone who fit me." Gabe didn't respond with words. He stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms, holding her like she was the only thing that made sense in the world. It wasn't passionate or frenzied, it was certain. A certainty neither of them had felt in years. They stood there a long time, breathing together. Healing. The next day brought the fallout. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Clarice walked into the Monroe Holdings executive floor, Gabe at her side, not hidden behind her, but beside her, hand in hand. They weren't there to fight. They were there to claim something. Rosalind met them at the elevator, surprise flashing across her usually composed face. They're all in the boardroom. Clarice nodded. Good. So are we. Inside the room buzzed like a hive of restrained judgment. The board members glanced at each other, clearing throats, raising brows. Douglas Monroe sat at the head of the table, stone-faced. Clarice, he said, folding his hands. This isn't a social call. We have shareholders waiting for a resolution. Clarice placed a slim folder on the table. This is a 5-year projection based on a strategy Gabe and I developed last night. We restructured 3 underperforming regions, divested from an inflated holding, and reallocated funds toward the sustainable housing initiative you keep postponing. The board members leaned in, suddenly attentive. Douglas blinked. You did all that in one night, Gabe answered, calm and clear. It's amazing what you can do when you're not trying to impress anyone. Just solve problems. Clarice met her father's eyes. We're not here to ask for permission. We're here to offer leadership, the kind that doesn't compromise people for profit. Douglas said nothing. One of the older board members, a woman named Lillian, who'd been silently flipping through the document, spoke next. This is good. Aggressive, but lean. And the returns are clean, Gabe said. No shortcuts, just transparency and vision. The room shifted. It wasn't surrender, but it wasn't resistance either. Douglas looked at Clarice, and for the first time the sternness in his face softened. You're not the same girl who sat at that table a year ago, he said. No, Clarice replied. I'm not, and I don't want to be. That night, after the boardroom dust had settled and the final email had been sent, Clarice and Gabe took a walk through Central Park. It was late, and the lamps cast golden puddles of light on the pavement. A breeze stirred her hair. He laced their fingers together, pulling her a little closer. You didn't have to bring me back into that room, he said. You could have stood on your own. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I could have, but I didn't want to. They stopped near the lake, the city lights shimmering in the rippling water. Clarice turned to him. I spent most of my life believing I had to do everything alone. That love was a liability. That vulnerability was weakness. But then, you showed up fixing a light bulb at 2 a.m, like it was the most important job in the world. He smiled. It kind of was. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. I didn't just fall for you, Gabe. I learned from you. I became more myself because you didn't try to change me, you respected me. That was the miracle. Gabe's throat tightened. And you saw through me when no one else even bothered to look. He took both her hands. I know we're still building this, but I'm in. All the way, as long as you want me. Clarice looked up at him, eyes glistening. I want you, she said. For real. No more pretending. Then, under the city lights with no cameras, no scripts, no expectations, she kissed him. It was slow, deep, home. And somewhere between the past and the future, 2 people who were never supposed to fit finally did. The board's silence didn't last long. Within 24 hours of Clarice's presentation, the tide began to shift. Emails were exchanged, whispered meetings held. Some board members were cautiously impressed. Others saw her defiance as dangerous precedent. The shareholders were divided, and more than a few were asking uncomfortable questions about leadership stability. Still, Clarice walked through the storm with her chin high, Gabe never far from her side. But on the 3rd morning, a letter arrived. She opened it at the kitchen island, fingers trembling only slightly. Gabe watched her from across the room, his coffee untouched. Notice of review temporary suspension of executive authority, pending emergency vote. Her breath caught. They were calling a vote, a formal challenge to her leadership. She blinked slowly, then set the paper down. Gabe stood and crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. Clarice. She shook her head. It's not unexpected, but it's still a punch. She managed a faint smile. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. He reached for her hand. You don't have to do this alone. I'm not, she said softly, and in that moment it was clear she'd been alone for so long, she'd forgotten how to accept support. And now that it was here solid and unwavering, it changed everything. The day of the vote arrived like a storm front. Clarice stood before the board in the same room that had tried to bury her identity more than once. She wore navy sharp and understated. No jewelry, no polish, only purpose. Douglas Monroe sat at the head of the table, gaze unreadable. Beside him, Henry Fields looked almost smug. He'd been waiting for this. A full shareholder quorum had been called. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the tension was thick enough to broadcast on its own. Clarice cleared her throat and stepped forward. "No notes today," she began. "I've given you all enough slides, spreadsheets, and forecasts to last a fiscal year." A ripple of chuckles, uneasy but real. She let the silence fall for a beat. "I'm not going to stand here and justify my relationship or my choices. You've already decided what you think about those. But I will remind you of something: leadership is not compliance. It's courage. It's seeing the people behind the profits. And for too long we've operated like those two things are separate." Her gaze swept the room. "I've brought you growth. I've brought vision. And yes, I've brought discomfort. Because disruption often feels like rebellion until it becomes the new foundation." Someone in the back nodded. She turned to her father. "Dad, you taught me to lead with clarity. You said, profit will follow conviction. Well, I'm giving you mine. And if you don't want it, if this board decides I'm not fit to lead, then I will step down. Not because I failed, but because I refuse to become someone I don't recognize just to stay." Then quietly she added, "But if you believe in the company, I know we can become. Then let me build it." Without apology. A beat of silence followed. Then a low voice called the vote. One by one, hands raised. It was slow, deliberate, and breathtaking. In the end, it wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. She stayed. Clarice let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her eyes found Gabe through the glass wall waiting just outside. She didn't smile. Not yet. Not until the choice was hers again. That evening, she and Gabe walked the High Line as the sun dipped over the Hudson, bathing the city in gold. "I didn't know if they'd keep me," she said, voice light but quiet. "I did," Gabe replied. "You walked in there like someone who wasn't afraid of losing." She looked at him. "I was afraid. I still am. But I've spent so many years trying to be right, I forgot how it feels to be real." Gabe stopped and turned to face her. "Clarice, what you did today, what you've been doing since that night in the resort lobby, it's not just bold, it's honest, and people are starving for that kind of leadership." She stared at him, her throat tight with something deeper than victory. "You changed me." "No," he said softly. "You just finally had room to be who you already were." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small square box. He frowned. "What's that?" Clarice opened it. Inside was a ring, but not just any ring. A modest gold band, simple and elegant with a tiny engraving on the inside, the light was never broken. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, holding his gaze. "I don't know how we navigate two lives, two cities, a son, and a past that doesn't always feel distant." Gabe's eyes filled. "But I do know this: I don't want to lead a company or a life without you in it. And I'm not asking you to propose. I'm asking you to choose this with me. As partners, as equals." Gabe took the box gently from her hands. Closed it. Then leaned in and kissed her with all the quiet depth of a man who had learned the hard way that real love never shouts, it shows up. When he pulled back, he whispered, "You already know my answer." And the city, ever impatient, paused just long enough to witness it. Snow had returned to Pine Haven. The March wind had curled back into winter's breath, dusting the resort's pine-shaded roofs with a thin layer of white. Gabe stood outside the small tool shed near the rear maintenance entrance, holding a flashlight in one hand and a worn leather journal in the other. His name was still etched on the toolbox beside him. G. Carter, though someone else had likely used it since he left. He hadn't come back to reclaim anything. He came to make peace with the man he used to be. Clarice had insisted on joining him, but he'd asked for a day. Just one. Alone. To touch the world where he and Eli had built a life from quiet survival. Where grief had taken up residence in his bones, but where hope had slowly, stubbornly returned, one routine, one bedtime story, one repaired light at a time. He stepped into the old maintenance corridor and flipped the switch. Nothing. The lights once again were out. He laughed softly under his breath. Figures. Gabe grabbed a spare fuse, climbed the stepladder near the breaker box, and began the familiar ritual. Screwdriver. Check wiring. Replace. As he worked, memories flooded back of frigid night's tools freezing in his hands, of running to Eli's bedside in the middle of a shift, of moments where no one saw him but he showed up anyway. It hadn't been glamorous, but it had been real, and real was everything. By noon, he stepped back outside just as a black SUV pulled up along the snowy curb. The door opened and Clarice stepped out, her coat flaring in the wind like something from a dream. No makeup, no press, just her. She walked toward him with a smile that warmed even the bitter mountain air. "You fixed the lights?" she asked, glancing up at the softly glowing fixtures in the lodge windows. He nodded. "Still remember how?" She tilted her head. "You ever miss it?" He looked around then, back at her. Sometimes. Not the cold, not the hours, but the simplicity of it. You fix a thing and it stays fixed for a while. Clarice walked closer and slipped her arm through his. "Life's not like that, is it?" "No," he said, "but it's not broken either, just complicated." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out." Gabe smiled. "You say that like it's easy." "No, I say it like it's ours." That night, the entire town gathered for the Winter Community Fundraiser at Pine Haven's event hall. Gabe had once fixed the stage lights for these events without anyone noticing. Now he stood in the crowd, a guest next to Clarice Monroe, who looked out of place only in title, not in heart. Eli held her hand like he'd done it 1,000 times. She bent down to whisper something in his ear, and the boy grinned, nodding toward the hot chocolate stand. She nodded back, watching him run off with 2 other kids from the lodge. Gabe turned to her. "You're good with him." "He's easy to love," she said softly. "So are you," he said, surprising her, and maybe himself. She didn't reply right away, just stared at him, eyes filled with something weightier than words. "I used to think the only way to lead was to stay untouchable," she whispered. "Strong. Alone." And now he asked. "Now I know that strength isn't in solitude. It's in choosing the right people to let in and letting them stay." The hall lights dimmed as someone tapped the mic on stage. It was Douglas Monroe. Clarice straightened in surprise. "He's here." Gabe followed her gaze. Douglas took the podium, clearing his throat before addressing the crowd. "My daughter asked me not to make a speech," he began. "So, naturally, I'm making one anyway." Laughter. He smiled briefly. "I spent my life building an empire believing that control and power were the cornerstones of leadership. But recently, I've watched someone I love lead with something I forgot existed: conviction without ego, compassion without apology." He looked directly at Clarice. "She reminded me that success isn't about how many people stand below you. It's about how many you lift beside you." The room was silent. Douglas continued. "So tonight, I want to thank the person who showed me that again. Not just my daughter, but the man who made her braver." Gabe blinked, stunned. Douglas stepped down from the stage and walked toward them. He stopped in front of Gabe and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for standing with her when I didn't know how." Gabe took the hand firm and steady. "I didn't stand for her. I just stood with her." Clarice watched them, eyes glistening. Later, under the stars outside the event hall, Clarice pulled Gabe aside. "This place," she said, breath curling in the night air. It's where it all started, isn't it? The lobby lights. That ridiculous robe. My terrible timing." He smiled. "It was the best timing of my life." She laughed. "You always say the simplest things like they're profound, because sometimes they are." Clarice reached into her coat pocket again. Not a ring this time. "A key. To the place across from yours," she said. "I rented it. At least for a while." Gabe stared at her surprised. "I want to learn this rhythm with you," she said. "Your world. Eli's world. Ours. I want to do the simple things, the hard things, the everyday things with you." He took the key gently, then pulled her into his arms. And for the first time everything felt exactly as it should be. Not perfect, but whole. Lights fixed, hearts open, together. The wedding wasn't grand. There were no marble halls, no designer gowns, no long guest list curated by assistants and corporate partners. Instead, there was a lake, half frozen, half glittering beneath the April sun, bordered by pines that swayed gently in the breeze. The air was crisp, clean alive with the scent of melting snow and spring just beneath the surface. Clarice stood beneath an arch made of pine branches and white linen, her hair loosely braided down her back cheeks flushed with more than just the cold. She wore a simple ivory dress that moved like wind and felt like peace. Eli, beaming in his little gray suit, adjusted the boutonniere on Gabe's lapel and whispered, "You look like a superhero." Gabe smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's only because of the cape under the shirt." Eli giggled, then ran to his spot beside Clarice holding the small pillow that carried 2 silver rings. The guests were few. Rosalind holding a cup of cocoa and blinking back what she swore were just allergies. Douglas Monroe seated near the front, his pride silent but unmistakable. A few neighbors from Pinehaven, Clarice's old college roommate, a baker who had once let Eli taste cake samples just for fun. No press, no spectacle, just people who mattered. Just love. The officiant, a kind woman from town with a voice like warm tea, began the ceremony as Gabe and Clarice joined hands. "Today," she said, "we celebrate not only the bond between 2 people, but the choice they made to see each other not as perfect but as present, not as polished but as real. Love, at its core, is not built on performance. It's built on presence. And today, these 2 choose presence together." Clarice looked up at Gabe, her eyes bright. "I used to believe I had to do everything alone," she said softly. "That independence meant isolation. That power meant silence. But then you came into my life carrying a wrench and a kind word, and you taught me the most beautiful truth I've ever known. Strength isn't about who you stand above. It's about who you stand with." Her voice wavered, but she held steady. "You showed me how to be soft without breaking. You reminded me that love doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stay. I promise to choose you every ordinary day, to build something with you not because it's expected but because it's ours." Gabe swallowed, hard fingers gently tightening around hers. "I was a man who fixed things," he said, voice low but clear. "Pipes, lights, broken hinges. But when I met you, I realized something. I didn't need to fix you. I just needed to stand beside you while you rebuilt yourself." He took a breath, the wind catching in his chest. "You gave Eli a second home before you ever gave me a promise. And that told me everything I needed to know. I don't just love you, I respect you. I see you. And I will spend the rest of my life showing up for you. The way you've shown up for me." Tears slipped silently down Clarice's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She wanted to remember how it felt to be seen so completely. The rings were exchanged simple, silver smooth. No diamonds, no fuss. Just symbols of something far more rare than glamour. Commitment. The real kind. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer erupted from the small crowd. Eli ran up and wrapped both arms around their waists, burying his face between them. "You're really married now?" he asked, eyes wide. Gabe knelt to his level. "Yeah, buddy, we really are." Eli turned to Clarice. Does that mean you're my mom now? Clarice crouched, cupping his cheeks in her hands. If you'll have me. He nodded solemnly. I already did. She kissed his forehead, and Gabe watched them, heart full to the brim. That night they returned to the same resort lobby where it all began. The lights, yes, those lobby lights now glowed steadily overhead, casting a warm, amber hue across the wooden floors and velvet chairs. Gabe had rewired them himself the week before, not because they were broken, because he wanted them to shine brighter than ever. Clarice stood by the fireplace wearing a thick sweater and wool socks, her wedding dress long since traded for comfort. Gabe approached with 2 mugs of cocoa. I was thinking, she said, taking hers, we should come here every year. Same day. Just us, even when it's snowing sideways. Especially then, she said, smiling. Because if we can make it through a storm, we can make it through anything. He touched her cheek. We already have. They sat by the fire, their hands intertwined. Eli snoring softly on a couch nearby, his sketchbook still open across his chest. Today's page filled with a stick-figure family now drawn with a house, and a glowing street lamp above it. Gabe looked at Clarice, heart thudding gently in his chest. You ever think, he whispered, how close we came to missing each other? She turned to him, eyes soft. No, I think about how lucky we were to notice. The fire crackled beside them. Outside, snow fell like confetti. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, the kind that never makes headlines but builds a life they didn't need anything more. Because the lights were on, the hearts were full, and the future, it was theirs.